Good morning. Last night I jammed my first session of Peace, the role-playing game by Robert the Narrator, Narrator Games. This is amazing. So good news is we were able to play. Bad news is 3 of Robert's players did not come. 2 had kind of warned us they were on the bubble. And the 3rd just didn't show, so it was just Brian and his son, brother-in-law, Josh. So, no problem. I prefer small groups. I really wanted to see what this felt like with 4 to 5 players, personally as a GM, but I also wanted to see I wanted to get a greater bit of feedback from 5e guys. These guys are all Pathfinder and 5e players, and one of the reasons we're doing this is I think that it's the perfect meld. I won't say between simple and complicated, because I think they're all equally mechanical in their ways, but I think this provides some things, and I've got notes of what I really noticed as a GM, but also what a little bit of the feedback that Brian and Josh gave me last night. So I had prepared. You guys can see those videos on the channel here. I had prepared an outline, right? A 5-act outline. You can just see it's just Act 1, Act 2. This is my prep for the most part. Then I had to flesh out some maps with a little bit of detail about, where things were at and the enemies and the page numbers those types of enemies were on, and opposed checks like the trap, finding the trap if they were to look for it, etc. What was in room B. So that was my prep, right? So basically 2 maps with all the information I would need for details of the creatures and the locales and important notes that might come into play. I had the camp mapped. This is where the in media res started, right here. River Mern, excuse me. The camp was on both sides of a narrow area of the river. There were trees that were in these large pine trees before it goes into the endless plains. The camp was pretty darn large. They started in A, and the elders' tent is B, and this was our in media res start when they were attacked, right? And that's really, and then I had Kalok's headquarters in the human district of Shril. They never got here, but I had a map of his home, his headquarter kind of palace, if they were to infiltrate in there, right? Which they, again, never got to. All right. Okay, so we knew 2 were on the bubble, but I expected 3 players, and 1 just didn't show up. I'm assuming Brian will have a chat with him about that. It's COVID. Grand Junction is in the red. Montrose is in the orange, so there's a lot of COVID cases in the last couple of weeks, and I get it, right? And we sat, Brian and Josh sat at one end of their dining room table, which is about 7 feet long. It's a long table, and I sat at the other end, so we had plenty of space between us. They did have dry erase maps, and they did have these very cool wooden tokens, which are incredibly cool. They told me I could get them on Amazon. They're wood-etched, square, flat tokens. Now, they say barbarian, fighter, choleric. They're 4 or 5e. And then they have, they have like 49 monster tokens that just have like a shape on them, and it would say humanoid, creature, whatever. Perfect, right? So we didn't use minis. We used these like flat. They're 1-inch square, and they fit perfectly in the 1-inch squares for movement. So we actually used maps and minis. So I would scribble, and I'm not a great artist, as you can see from my maps, but I scribbled out to start real quick while they were deciding about their character's connection. I scribbled this out real quick on one of the dry erase boards. Very simple. I just made X's for maps, a round circle with a black dot for tents. And I did it as far apart as I could on the dry erase board we had, which was about right. It wasn't quite as big as I had anticipated this to be. Okay. So session 0, we waited quite a bit for the third guy. He didn't show, so that backed us up. Then we talked about the game a little bit, not a lot. I told them I always facilitate the games, so don't worry too much. I gave them an index card cheat sheet, which I left with them, of the things they can do that are kind of common, right? And on the back side of that index card cheat sheet was some of the conditions that could occur to them that are common. And on both sides of the cheat sheet said, remember the fate die, right? Because it's huge. It's huge. Okay. So those were kind of their guides. We made first Brian's character, Zargard. Let's see here. Zargard. Brian Zargard, Orc Warrior, 6'3", 270, level 1. Wanted to be nothing but a straight brutal warrior. So he put all of his 22 war points or combat points. What do we call those? Attack stats? Attack stats. All 22 of his attack stats in warfare. So 3 die 6, and then 1 die 6 default for the other 2 stats. So he was clearly built as a 6'3" warrior. He picked his talents were, I got him here, Elm Affinities, Racial, the Unstoppable Advance, Shield and Melee Training was his one training one, Armor Proficiency, and Savage Blow were his other 2 of 3 starting. And then he had picked Longsword, Dagger, Medium Armor, and a Healing Potion, and then he had to borrow 12 shards from his in-game brother, because they chose their connection with, they would be brothers, orc brothers, who had survived an attack on their tribe when they were children and escaped. So he borrowed 12 shards from his little brother, Harkis, to buy a shield and an adventure kit, so that was kind of fun. So he's playing a 6'3" orc. Gain power was his drive. Josh made Harkis. I don't know if you guys will remember the Warlock game, which was also an amazing experience with these guys. He also had a character in that named Harkis, but that was a long, noble name because he was a nobleman in that. And this, he's Harkis, an orc. And he's picked adventure, 6', 230. He's the little brother. He's literally littler, and he's also about 3 years younger. So he's going to be like the little brother who looked up to his big brother, especially when they were orphaned as children, when their camp was decimated by raiders, and who was left was scattered to all corners of the endless plains. And they vowed, this was their story to me and their connection. They vowed that they would never be victims again, and that they would find a way to not only survive, but it gave Zargard his drive of power, gain power. And Harkis's drive is seek thrills, because he's the younger, kind of footloose, crazy little brother. Seek thrills. So this was cool. All right. He had a scimitar. Phantom move, which is amazing. Scorpion thrust. Hand-to-hand training, and turn the blow. Turn the blow came into play later in the session, and it was an amazing moment. It was so cool. He failed to ever have enough attack points during the conflicts to utilize successfully Phantom Move or Scorpion's Thrust. He put 1d6 plus 3 in Warfare, but again, attack points give you options, and you have to decide, are you going to be defensive, or are you going to attack with those, etc. And he was a thrill seeker, kind of capable of all of these defensive things, capable of hand-to-hand fighting, etc. Very, very capable, but was a thrill seeker, so he tended to throw caution to the wind. He had light armor, adventure kit, and his owed 12 shards from his brother. Okay, also, orcs have the racial traits of element affinity, which is pretty cool. It means they can pick up these breaches in the planar like planar leaks and things like that. And they're not affected by those things as much. It's pretty cool. Again, it's part of the world lore. It's really, really cool. Unmatched Fury, which they both have, of course, because they're both orcs, and Night Sight, which means they can see fairly normally at night or in the dark. I used straight statistics, straight monster blocks based on the NPCs in the book. I didn't change any numbers. I didn't make my own. Most people will tell you that play with me and that have listened to my commentary or listened to me talk about my style, I generally make my own bad guys. I generally make my own NPCs, etc. And I would. I mean, if we continue to do this, I'll probably eventually have my own slightly tweaked so they don't look just like the book. They might have different powers, different abilities, slightly different attack points, etc. But for this, I wanted to play it straight raw. And I tried to the best I could. Okay. I did tell them we would start in media res. It's awesome. They held on to the table book because Brian wants to run it for his guys sometime in the next couple of weeks. He's thinking for their first December session, he wants to give, since those guys couldn't make it, Brian wants to run his 5e guys with this. He loved it. Brian and with Josh loved it. Josh really loved it. Josh is the one that complained about Dark Age of. He just didn't have enough to spark or enough to look at on his cheat to choose to do things. They really do want to sync themselves. They want to connect to the game through their characters' sheets. They want to connect to the session through skills, attributes, options, and that's okay. I mean, most people do. I mean, most people have been playing a particular way, and when you're coming from Pathfinder, where that's part of the deal, and you're coming from 5e, that's part of the deal, and I'm okay with that. And this, in my opinion, if somebody were to say to me, that's all they ever want to do, then I would choose Peace over those other games, over any modern D20. Modern D20 to me is bloated. It's cumbersome for the GM. I mean, I look at, you know, when I GM'd 5th edition, and I'm looking at that high level stuff, these huge hit point bubbles, and I'm looking at all of these abilities and things that the creatures have in their stat block, and I'm like, man, this is not going to be fun for the GM. This is going to be nothing but work. This gives them all of those things, and he also, Robert, as a GM, knows how to make handling the creatures more friendly to the GM, and indeed he does that, right? Something as simple as saying they roll attack points, but we get set attack points. Okay, and I want to talk about that with my notes that I took. Well, you know what? I'm going to talk about the notes right now because I think this is pretty important. So first, the thing I found as a player in the Roberts game the other night, and then we talked about again, attack points, variable attack points. Something this simple changes the whole dynamic of every single round of conflict, and I personally love it. They loved it because it made it active. Number one, they were rolling to see. There was anticipation. I mean, how badass am I going to be this round, right? Or am I going to be struggling in the fight, right? They were great at not looking at it as a mechanical, oh man, I'm screwed, or oh man, oh wow. They looked at it as the fight was tougher this round, right? Or they looked at it as they couldn't get opportunity in the chaos of combat. Brilliant. These guys definitely don't play mechanical. They don't role play the mechanics. They role play, and they use the mechanics to inform their role play, which is all we ever want, right, from our role players, right? Don't look at it. Let's not escape the world. Let's not escape the fiction by talking about 12, right? By talking about the mechanics just screwed me, right? Or nat 20, nat 20. Why not describe this incredibly violent attack upon the enemy, and then you can wink at the GM and say 20, right? Something. Okay. So what this did was it makes combat incredibly active because the players have to assess strategically, tactically, what can I spend my AP points on? Should I save some for a defensive move? Should I use some toward a move, a power, a talent? So unlike unlike feats or talents in other games, they can just use them every turn, willy-nilly, all the time. This limits you based on spending attack points, strategically, tactically. You can use battle scars to change some of those things, etc. And you can activate some with battle scars. Okay. I love that. They love that. And it actually made, unfortunately for Harkus, only having 1d6 plus 3, Harkus really was forced at times to either be offensive or totally defensive, because he just didn't have enough attack points and he needed to be smart. And I'll tell you why. What changed for him, when I do the recap here, you'll find out why it became so, in a way, so tactical for him. Okay. Second, battle scars. As a GM, as a player, obvious, right? How many games do players have binnies? How many games, not how many games, but there are plenty of games where players can use a luck point or a binny, or what is 5th edition called, inspiration points, etc., right? So this is not uncommon, right? Empowering the players to have another shot, have another reroll, have another thing, or to do something spectacular. Okay. But the GM has battle scars, and it allows me to be a player with a resource, and I can use them liberally to be a pain in the ass to the players. What I mean by that is, there's an example in the session last night where they managed to capture one of the kidnappers at the beginning in media res. Zargard, when they were running away, his final disengagement attack was to grab and tackle one of the ones he was fighting when they turned to run away. He could have just disengaged an automatic attack, right? But he said, no, I'm grabbing him. I'm going to grab him to pull him to the ground. So he captured, in an opposed strength check, he grabbed and captured one of the kidnappers, and then they bound him. And then they dealt with some fallout. Later, when they interrogated him, I used battle scars to keep his composure up. I had 9. I started the prophecy meter at 9, right? The prophecy meter empowers me with battle scars that I can use every scene, and they reset every time we change into a new scene. So as they were interrogating and trying to terrify him into spilling his guts about what was going on, I would spend battle scars to bring his composure back up to half, and it allowed me to not have GM fiat. He's not going to talk to you. He's not going to talk to you. He's not going to talk. No, I spent battle scars. And I explained to them that I'm using battle scars so he can't talk, he won't talk to you, right? And they finally gave up trying to interrogate him, and it was perfect, because I wanted this guy to know that he was going to be murdered one way or another, right? And it made sense that he was so loyal to the cult, the Dark Night Hand cult, that he was not about to spill his guts. And but the only way I can do that mechanically without cheating, because they were rolling influence and they were doing influence damage. This again is part of the session. Part of the mechanics, right? You do influence attacks versus combat attacks, right, or power attacks. And I just spent those battle scars. He would refuse to speak up as to where they went, as to why they took her, right? Okay. Finally, the elements are seamlessly, and I just talked about this, round around from warfare to influence to power, influence to power to warfare. The players choose before they roll their attack points what is they're trying to do. So in a way, so this is what's cool. So in Dungeons & Dragons, you're supposed to declare your action, right? We roll initiative, etc. You're supposed to declare your action, and then we proceed down a procedural chart. And I don't know about most of you, but as an old school GM, in old D&D, in OSRs, I tend to forget the declaration of action. I basically come around to somebody else's turn. I say, okay, Joe, it's your turn. What do you want to do? And Joe says, I'm going to attack him in melee. And we go, okay, roll the dice. Instead of having to declare before we start the round, right? I'm very, very bad at that. It's an old habit, hard to kill. But in this, they have to decide their declaration of action is, are you doing warfare, influence, or power? Power is magic, right? And you need power for certain talents. And then influence is usually conversation, right? But what's brilliant is what Robert's done is he's turned that charisma check, that influence check, that intimidation check, that conversation check into combat. And what's smart about this, and Big Mike will tell you this, I'm the kind of player in Dungeons & Dragons, We had a fight with 3 witches in a windmill in one of Big Mike's sessions. I think it was from the Ravenloft or Lestrade campaign books. It was a scenario from that, I think. And my character, right in the middle of a combat in which half our players were going down, my character stopped and spoke to them and basically tried to, tried his charisma or his intimidation right in the middle of this Dungeons and Dragons conflict. And there's no rule that says you can't do that. But Big Mike's put in a position to say, well, okay, make a charisma check. Let's see how this affects this whole thing. And if I kill it with a 20 plus my +6 charisma, etc., I've got a 26, and I'm not doing a bard thing. I'm not doing a talent thing. I'm saying, I'm screaming this out. Stop this. We can make a deal, right? And Mike's stuck, going, should I just ignore the player, or So Big Mike has to say, yeah, cool, go ahead, roll your charisma, and then he's got to figure out how that works, right? Right. In this, if I want to use influence and I want to scream out, stop this madness, quit killing each other, let's negotiate. It's an influence attack, right? And I have to lower that composure to a point in which they're gonna change their attitude, right? And therefore the mechanics, whether it's physical or it's dialogue or it's magical, all use the same mechanical power. Meanwhile, your chance at deriving quality attack points are based on 3 different abilities. Your character's either going to be good at combat, it's going to be good at influence, or it's going to be good at power. So if I want to negotiate as a feeble wizard, I may not have a lot of influence. If I want to negotiate, if I want to use power, and I'm not a magic user, pointless, right? I'm not going to get any points for that. So you're also going to try to build your character so you can have some of these options. For instance, like Zargard, for instance, tried multiple times to interrogate the captive, and he tried later to negotiate in the cavern, and had 0 influence because he put all 22 of his attack points in combat. So Zargard was just not capable, and he's as huge as he was and as violent as he was. It doesn't affect his intimidation, right? I mean, there's something about his demeanor that doesn't intimidate, right? Even though he's this huge, capable warrior, there's something about him that just doesn't terrify the enemy, right? That's what that would represent. And all of those seamlessly work perfectly, and there's a mechanic to support every choice the players make, and a mechanic to support the GM in how to resolve the situation because of the core rule set. It's brilliant. Next, the prophecy meter, which I started at 9. I was going to start it at 8 or 7 or 8, which is kind of right in the middle, a little tense, but I pushed it to 9, and I said, no, I want it to be dark. I want it to be dreary. I want it to be, there's not a lot of birds in the sky. When they hunt, it's scarce. The food is scarce. It's not just tense. It feels like there's a pall over the whole world right now. And so I have this prophecy meter. Well, the prophecy meter gives me battle scars equal to that number that I can use at will, right, against them, like I did in the interrogation stuff, right? Okay. And of course, the prophecy meter is affected by their attributes. So one of the reasons I chose a higher prophecy meter was I want them to know the world is dangerous, it's dark, and I want them now to recognize the value in the decisions they choose to make to impact the world. They can make the world worse, they can make the world better. And we'll get to that, because we did actually get to a place in the session where we had to tally the prophecy meter based on a lot of the actions they took, etc. And we had to divvy out experience points, etc. before we decided not to go on to Act 3. We were going to go on to Act 3, we decided it was getting too late. Okay. And then finally, how do I say this? The combat is dynamic. I think it's active. You're never, as a player, looking, going, what can I do? You know what you can do, but you also know you need a certain level of attack points. The great thing about combat and peace, the absolute, I just can't, it's hard to express it, but for instance, in D&D, you can keep the armor class hidden of the enemy, and that's kind of a mystery. And guys will roll and say, well, I hit armor class 3. right? Or the GM can just say roll to hit, and you never tell them what the armor class they need, right? They're constantly just rolling, and eventually they'll figure out by the third round, oh, I need a 13 or better. Okay, I get it. Okay. In this, of course, they have attack points, and when they roll high, they know they got a certain amount of attack point. What they don't know is the defense of their opponent, and that will give them a certain number of attacks against them. So let's say, for instance, they're against a minion, and he rolls a 10, and they have 3 defense. They're going to get 3 attacks against this one minion, or against 3 different minions, right? They can divvy those points up to fight 3 minions, like this epic fight. Okay. But let's say on the next turn they decide to roll influence, and he rolls a 4, and he wants to influence these particular minions, and it turns out these minions have a great willpower defense of, let's say, 6, and now he's literally, he can only do a focused influence attack one time on one of those characters, right? So it creates this really dynamic, not only round around thing of what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it, and do I save some of those points? Do I use all those points? What do I do? But it also puts them in a position of a little bit of mystery as to defense. And of course, there's already physical defense, armor defense, which reduces reduces damage, etc. So, and then of course, there's the having to do damage, right? So I can choose to attack the goblin 3 times, but I have to roll damage 3 times. And so what that amounts to is not hitting or missing like D&D, the boring hit, miss, hit, miss, hit, miss. You're attacking him, right? You're literally engaging an attack. Now you have to find out if you're able to penetrate by rolling a damage chance. Perfect. I mean, to me, the mechanics, they rectify everything, in my opinion. And I'll say this. I don't say this lightly, because I've spent 40 years playing old D&D and OSRs and Moldvay. And I don't say this lightly. It fixes all the things wrong with D&D, in my opinion, right? Okay. And that's really my notes. So I talked about these a little bit out of context because I think it's important, because it also talks about the mechanics and our responses. And again, these are notes from just our conversation and things I picked up that really empowered me. The battle scars turned out as a GM tool to be so cool, right? Because I didn't felt I was using fiat then. I didn't felt I was cheating him to not have the card. So in D&D, I could just say, no, this card's going to be mum. Or I can make a reaction roll. Well, let's say I roll the reaction roll. The guy gets a +2 charisma, and the reaction roll, the guy's, oh, yeah, I'll help you, I'll help you. That's fine. It's at least mechanically supported. But I don't have an ability as a GM to kind of, if I do, but then I have to just flat say, this guy's not going to talk to you, and that's GM fiat. And what it does is it makes players feel like they're being railroaded, right? When I just flat tell them I'm spinning a battle scar to keep his composure up, they know I'm not railroading him. I am playing a game, and they're not able to win it right now, right? Okay, and there's a reason for this. He is not. He's loyal. It's going to take you 2 days. It's going to take you 2 days to convince this guy to talk to me, kind of thing, right? And that's fair to them. They don't feel railroaded. They don't feel like I'm ignoring what they're trying to achieve. Instead, I'm countering what they're trying to achieve with an actual resource for the GM, which is a mechanic. And it's fair. They don't feel railroaded. They don't feel cheated. They know they're in a game now, right? And that's perfectly fine. Every player will accept that. What they won't accept is, why? Why can't I do this? Why are you ignoring me when I say I want to do this thing? So show me the mechanic that supports why I can't, or show me the mechanic that supports how the GM is negating this, without it being just straight, shut up, do what I tell you, right? Okay. Nobody wants to play with that guy anymore. I got news for you. There's plenty of guys out there that will tell you that. Nobody wants to play with that GM anymore, right? So, you know, they just don't. All right. So we have Zargard, the older orc brother. We have Harkis, the adventurer, younger orc brother. They tell the tale of the Endless Plain. They were with a tribe of orcs long time ago that was nomadic, traveled around the Endless Plains, and one day as children they were waylaid by bandits or raiders or something, and they witnessed horrors as they were wiped out, and they ran and scattered, and he took his little brother and ran into the hills, and they had to go on and live there. Okay. So, literally, that's their story to me, how they're connected. And that explains their drive. Okay. And again, Zargard's is gain power. Harkis is seek thrills. I start the game literally in this camp, no background. I say you literally wake up, both of you wake up in the morning to the screams and the yells and the smell of smoke, and you both have flashbacks to this traumatic event in your childhood when your camp was raided, 25 years ago, whatever it was, 30 years ago, and you awaken and in this situation, and Harkus, Josh says, I awaken among two widows that I bedded last night. I am butt naked, and I hear the crash and I smell the smoke, and I immediately grab my sword, buck naked, and I'm out of the tent looking for what's happening, leaving these two widowers, widows, nude in my furs and my blankets. I thought, that's a battle scar, dude. That's a thrill seeker. I mean, two things. One, he's telling me he's bedded two widows, not young girls from the tribe, but last night found two widows in the camp and bedded them, right? Which is like safe, right? Super safe. But it's seeking thrills. But then he runs out into combat in this violence, buck naked, with just his scimitar. So I gave him a battle scar. Bam, dude, that's a battle scar, man. Go for it. This is huge. And it was one of the things I wanted to talk about in the notes. The game is also, on top of that, it's your heroes. You are called heroes, you play heroes, but it is lethal, and he's going to find that out in the first attack. Okay. Zargard rolls over. He's in the same tent. He rolls over, pushes one of the girls off away from him, stands up, and he hears this clanging, clashing. He reaches for his sword and shield, and again he says, in my loincloth, I'm out of the tent. Neither one of them put their armor on, right? And I told them they could make an athletics check to put their armor on in 1d6 turns divided by 2, or they could skip it, right? And of course, if they fail the acrobatics check, then it's going to take them the full 1d6 turns to get doff their armor. Okay, well, not turns, but seconds, right? Okay, well, turns, it would be turns. Anyway, so they're out of the tent, and Harkus to the left of the tent sees four he thinks humans, because they're in dark robes and cloaked, and they have torches and swords, and they're burning a tent. And they got two of them. There's four of them burning one tent, not far from him, maybe 3 squares, right? I'll say squares, 15 feet. And they have a girl there on her knees, and he's about to kill her, and he charges into these four on his first turn. And of course, we have to set initiative. So remember, your first choice, he chose warfare. He rolled his attack points, I think it was 5. 2 plus his 3, so 5. He rolled 5. Dives into a fray with 4 minions, right? And he can win this. I mean, it's possible. But he's no armor. He's buck naked, and he has 5 attack points. And remember, that sets his initiative for that whole combat with those 4. 5. Every round he gets to roll his attack points over, but he's always going to be at 5 initiative, right? So he's lost initiative to these guys, if I remember right. I think their attack points were... No, I think he did have initiative. Yeah, he did. That's right, because he dispatched one on the first hit. He killed one. Drives in with a scimitar and kills one dead. The one that was about to kill the girl. She scrambled, and I describe how the minute he cuts off his head, the girl scrambles on her knee, hands and knees off into the forest. And then he turns on the other 3, and he has no attack points left to use one of... Well, he did have... I think he had... no, he had to use 2... He did a focused attack to make sure he could hit the one. Did I write down his initial attack points? Because this was huge. I mean, this was like... I mean, we're talking 10 minutes into the session. Did I write down the attack points he got? I didn't write down the attack points he scored. I did write down that he cut him down 3 attack points. Excuse me. Yep, I sure did right here. 3 attack points. Zargard came out of the tent, and he ran to the right toward the elders. He wanted to run toward the elders' tent, and he could see the chaos and people being killed and tents burning, and it was smoking, and he's running that way. So Harkus went immediately to the first group he could get to the left. That's what he said. I want to go to the first group I see I can get to. And Zargard's running through the camp during the chaos to the right. Harkus loses initiative gets initiative, but does what's called a focused attack. He takes every bit of the attack points he has to attack one, and he kills one. The other three hit him, bang, bang, bang. No armor reduction. He's at -3 and dying. Boom. First, literally the first round. All three of these guys hit him. Attack him. They all make their damage checks against him. And remember, he had no attack points left to do any of his fancy defensive tactics, like turn the blow, etc. So he found out literally out of the gate what happens when you roll a 1 and you add your +2 to it or whatever. And then he said, what can I do? And I said, it's on your little card, your index card. Focused attack. Even if you don't have enough attack points, you're allowed one attack. You just focus it all. You can't do anything else. And so he focused it all. He killed one. But then the other three turned on him. They all made their damage rolls. There was no armor reduction, and he was -3. So it was 11, 11, and 11 because it's set damage. So once you make the damage roll, it's a set amount of damage subtracting your physical resistance. So it was 11, 11, and 11, 33 points. He only had 30 hit points. He was -3 and out, right, and dying. He needs some kind of attention. Zargard doesn't know this, right? And this, I will say this about Brian and Josh. I've been playing with Brian for years, and Josh for the last year or so. These guys do not metagame, and I love them for it because they don't sacrifice the truth of the fiction to metagame lifesaver or something, right? Brian didn't try to find a excuse for why Zargard would have recognized his brother just got cut down. No, he could have. He could have said, I have this sixth sense. It's my brother's gone down. Or, Josh could have said, I scream out, Zargard, and say, go down. No, they just play it like it's a crazy, chaotic battle, and shit happens, right? But I won't lie to you. Josh was utterly stunned because they're heroes, and he just couldn't believe he was dying like that. At one point, he's like, "Dude, this is why we don't play OD&D. We don't want to die like this." Well, but lethality is what makes this stuff, right? But anyway, so he's dying. In 4 turns, he will be dead. Okay. But I'll get to that in a second. So Zargard races, and I'm telling him as he's moving. Remember, he's a long way, so it's going to take him 3 rounds of full movement to get to the Elder's tent. Why he wants to go to the Elder's tent, he explains that he wants to get to the center of the camp, and he wants to make sure the Elder and his family are safe. Okay. So he's headed to the Elder's tent, passing burning tents, passing people being killed. And at one point, I say, you're cut off by 2 thugs, and he gets up in a combat with these 2 thugs. He brings these 2 thugs down in, I think, 2 more rounds. And then he gets to the Elder's tent. He can hear the Elder on the other side of the tent screaming, Jasmine, yelling for his wife. He comes around the tent to discover that the Elder is fighting off 3 of these dark night hand, what they're called dark touched. But I tell him, make a perception check with your experience. As you come around the tent, you see him screaming for his wife as he's swinging madly this sword to keep him at bay, and they're fainting and throwing these feeble attacks at him. And I said, make a perception check for me. And so he rolls, he succeeds, and I say, you instantly recognize these guys aren't trying to hit him, they're not trying to kill him. He doesn't know that. You can tell the Elder doesn't know that. He's swinging crazily, trying to defend himself while he screams for his wife, who is, he doesn't know. But I said, but when you come around that tent, these 4 guys are trying not to hurt him. They're trying not to kill him, and that should cue you to something. I didn't say that, but, it should cue him to something. Anyway, this is the 6th turn, and I had written, in 3 turns they will grab her, they will get her to her in 3 turns, and in 6, they will all run away into the woods, leaving the decimation of what they've done, stealing the Elder's wife, kidnapping the Elder's wife. That was the in media res prologue. This is turn 6. As he runs over to help the Elder, they all turn and run north into the woods, northeast into the woods. The whole camp of enemies start running out, leaving bodies and burning and screaming, and people on their knees, wounded and crying. And he immediately turns to the Elder, and the Elder's screaming. They've taken Jasmine, and they have this little conversation. Okay, at that point, Zargard, he brings the Elder around to the front of the tent. The Elder says, we must or no, he says, why would they do that? Why did they not attack you? Is what Zargard says. Why were they not attacking you? And of course, the elder doesn't necessarily know this, and he says, I was defending him. I don't know what you're talking about. So he's thinking there's something fishy here, right? Maybe he's set up his wife. Well, they come around the tent, and they see the decimation, and it hits Zargard. Where is Harkis? Meanwhile, I go to Harkis, and I say, during this fray, Harkis, you're out. But at some point, you kind of groggily feel like you're being drugged by your feet somewhere. And I say, and there's because it takes 15 minutes to heal in the game, 15 minutes of time. So I'm describing to him that you're kind of half conscious, half unconscious, and you feel somebody pick up your feet and dragging you. And then you don't know how much time's passed, but you kind of groggily recognize somebody's applying pressure to one of your wounds and binding your wounds of your arms. And then I say, now you need to make a heal check on behalf of this NPC that's helping you, doing healing. So he's involved, right? And so he rolls, and I add the healer, I add the NPC girl's education check to it, and it's successful. And so he's healed, because he's at negative, he gets to heal up to 1 hit point. And I say, you wake up, and you look at your blurry face, you can barely see, but you see the outline of somebody, and you can tell it's a woman. And then when you wake up and you start to say something to her, you start to mouth something or whatever, your mouth is really dry. It's a cotton mouth, bile in your mouth because you've died, you vomited up, you've probably pissed yourself and whatever when you went down. And she notices, you can tell from the way she moves and looks toward you that she realizes you've awakened, and she runs off out of sight. And then I cut back to Zargard talking to him. Okay. And again, that has to happen over about a 15-minute period according to the rules. It takes about 15 minutes to do a heal check. So I said this was all kind of happening while he was fighting through camp and moving through camp. So it turns out the 2 widowers that he had bedded the night before crawled out of the tent, saw him get cut down immediately, ran over when those minions left to burn other tents and do other damage, and they drug him into the forest, and they doctored him, and they left him. These 2 women that he had shown an act of kindness to, right? Okay. I forgot. Before those, when they all ran away, again, to disengage, he tackled one and secured him. That's what it was. I was trying to remember why. And while he was fighting and grappling to hold him down, and he's yelling at Willem to tie him, restrain him, and Willem's restraining him, and they're getting him on his feet. They drag him around to the front of the tent. They see the decimation, and that's when he drops him on the ground, and he turns to Willem and says, why weren't they trying to attack you? What the hell's happened here? Why would they take your wife? I want answers, basically. And Willem, of course, explains, yes, they've taken my wife. I'll tell you more later, but look at the decimation, and turns his attention on the camp of what they have to deal with. They got people dying, people wounded, people dead, burning tents, and he realizes then, Harkis, where's my brother? And so he starts to run back down toward their tent, and meets Harkis crawling and finally up on one knee, because Josh describes how he crawls out of the bushes, uses his scimitar to get up on one knee, and then up on both feet, and kind of stumbling through camp, badly wounded, 1 hit point. He stumbles into the middle of the camp and meets Zargard. Zargard takes him up, picks him up, and carries his little brother to Wilhelm, sets him down, and says, you must explain this. My brother is almost dead. Anyway, they have this great conversation. And Zargard makes straight influence attacks upon Wilhelm, trying to get him to tell him what the hell's going on. He has a poor influence score, 1d6. It doesn't go, right? Remember, Wilhelm is a guild-leading lieutenant, and it's just he's not gonna convince him to spill the beans if he doesn't want to. Okay. They help Harkis into the tent, and they begin to narrate how they spend the rest of the day, preparing the bodies, piling the bodies for a mass funeral, helping those wounded. Zargard makes a couple of heal checks, wrapping and binding wounds of some of the men, and helping the women. Meanwhile, Harkis, on his feet, still 1 hit point, ventures out of the tent looking for the girl that saved him. and he starts wandering around trying to find and recognize if he could see any of these. He wants to find this girl that had pulled him to safety and healed him. So we have this pretty cool post in media res conflict resolution. Okay, and that was fade to black. That was prologue. That was the beginning. So we fade up, and I tell him that the day's gone now. It's dark. You've got the bodies prepared for a mass burial. Those that are wounded are taken care of. All the tents have been doused and put out, and they've been buried in a large. They've all been buried under sand, etc. And the ground now is clean. You only have a handful of tents left. You have the elders' tent, which is intact. They decimated many of the people, killing children and women, etc. Okay, and this is where Harkis is now resting peacefully, so he can heal up. And Zargard sits with Wilhelm and says, "Now talk to me. Tell me something. This is, you will not. I will not allow you to not." Okay, and that's when I kind of give him the background. How did you guys get to this camp? And you guys were responding to a small village, to a messenger who had come from this little camp saying, "We need your help. There are people harassing our camp and our elder." And so these two brothers had responded to a call for help, and they went out to the camp. The first day at camp, they talked, they celebrated, they learned a little bit. He bedded the two widows. They wake up under attack. Wilhelm tells him, "We called for help because these guys have been coming in and threatening me for a rumored treasure called Kord's Hoard." Kord is the god. Kord's Hoard. And Zargard, Brian plays it along and he laughs and he goes, Kord's Hoard. Yes, we've heard, everybody in the Endless Plains has heard rumors and stories of the myth of Kord's Hoard, a great, vast treasure. And that's rubbish, spits. That's why would people bother you for that? And he says, because there's these rumors going around that I know where this treasure is hidden. And then, Zarg, again, he really can't influence him, so he's just having a conversation. It's not a combat at this point. But I'm giving him a little bit, so he knows, more what's happened and what's going on. And he says, well, these guys have come 3 or 4 times threatening. Obviously, last night, they were done threatening. They decided to take action to extort the information from me. That's what I guess. Meanwhile, they have this captive. So Zargard and he agree. Let's wait till the morning until Harkis is back fully rested on his feet, and we will intimidate this captive. And we won't feed him. We won't water him. Tie him out. So he ties him. I forgot about this too. This was brilliant. Ties him up and he drags him over to the river and he drops him in the shallows of the cold river and ties him to a rock, and he's like floating in shallows. He's sitting. I mean, he's not literally in so deep. I mean, it's a shallow. He's sitting in the river, tied to a large stone he can't move. All feet, his hands and feet are bound together, and he leaves him floating in the river all night long. So it's not so cold he'll die from it, but it's miserable. He's floating in the river all night long. Next morning, he goes out. First thing, drags him out of the river, drags him into camp, and I've automatically given him a bonus by reducing his chance to intimidate this guy, because he's been up all night floating in the river, cold, wounded, etc. But I spend battle scar after battle scar to keep bringing his composure back up, which technically is a little bit, because normally you have to have an ally that does this, right? But I would describe that his allies, he knows his allies and his loyalty to his allies, and that inspires him to keep his chin up. So in a way, I use his allies as a what do you call it? A crutch, as an excuse to use battle scars to bring his confidence. So they get nothing from him, and he's frustrated, but he doesn't do any more. But he threatens to torture him. He goes, rest a while, fool, and we will start with 1 finger at a time, or something like that. He said something about taking digits. And Willem says, never fear, you must rest. We must get the camp in order. They will send a messenger. They won't have just taken her. They will send what they want. And Brian says, or Zargard says, we know what they want. They want this treasure. You say it doesn't exist, that it's a rumor. what are you going to do? And he says, and he shrugs, and so I say, Willem shrugs and says, I want my wife back. I would beg you and your brother to retrieve my wife, please, I beg you. And Zargard, playing his drive, says, and what do I get from it? And he tells him that he will do what he can to endeavor to get him power, whether it is locally among his tribe or put him on the path to greater power. And Zargard says, I will rest on this. Okay, now I had awarded Harkis 2 battle scars, one for seeking thrills, when he described how he had bedded widows the night before and went out butt naked. I gave him a battle scar, which I failed to mention, but he got a battle scar for a thrill seeker. Okay, then he automatically gets a battle scar when you are dropped to dying. So he gets 2 battle scars. So he only started with 2. He's up to 4. Okay. Meanwhile, Zargard spent 1 battle scar in his interrogation. I think his interrogation to roll extra damage on an influence check, which I then immediately countered and brought his composure back up. So he spent, I think, 2 battle scars. So he started with 6. 6. Let's see. Started with 6. He was down to he finished the game at 2. I can't remember where he was at in the first scene, but he finished the session with 2 out of 6. And Josh finished with 1 out of 2. They wrote 2 in their total. Okay, was 1 and 2. But in the first act, I think he spent 2, or the prologue. Okay, so they negotiate and they decide the next day, right? And I say it takes 2 days, 3 days. You guys are waiting, and I say, Zargard says he is stomped around. He has twice tried to interrogate this guy. Harkis has been healing. He has been going around the camp helping the families build shelters, and helping tend to the wounded that need bandage changes, etc. And they both do all of this unbelievable kindness and unbelievable care of the village. They are clearly joined now. They are almost. They all share a similar event in their lives. Their village was wiped out by people like this 25 years ago, and so they have this instant kind of feeling for this group, which is really cool. But meanwhile, they don't know this. But everything they do that's kind, I'm giving them a prophecy meter adjustment. Not meter, but I'm tallying what they're doing for the prophecy meter. But Zargard finally gets to the end of his rope, and he begins to remove digits. I'm taking away positive points every time he tortures this guy, right? So he's reduced himself to now torturing this guy, it's an evil act. So I'm taking 1 point away every time he takes a digit away. And again, I had 9 battle scars, which reset every scene. So the next day, I have 9 battle scars. He's refusing to speak. Second day, he takes a couple of fingers. I spin battle scars. He refuses to tell him anything. Third day, he takes, I think, 2 more fingers. He only has his thumb left. I'm docking them for these points, right, in evil deeds. Anyway, it's very cool. It's exactly the way the world's supposed to work. Meanwhile, Harkis is looking for the girl that saved him. He's helping people, so he's getting 1 for this, and he's getting 1 for that, anyway. And so, but the third day, 6 guys arrive, cloaked in these dark robes. They're all humans, by the way, and 1 orc with them, but he's kind of the muscle. But all humans for the most part. And they arrive, and they have their demand. They have their ransom demands, and Harkis makes a thievery check against their perception to hide when they all arrive. He hides in the bushes and watches this conversation between his brother Willem and the 6, as the rest of the village kind of slink away and hide in their tents, and they're not in any condition to fight these guys, and they don't want any more trouble. And Willem and Zargard in the middle of camp talk to this group. Harkis uses thievery to hide. They don't know he's there, and he makes an opposed check. He doesn't know if he succeeded, but I said, okay, make your roll. But he did. He succeeded, so he's successfully hiding. And they tell him, bring. We want to know where the treasure's at. You have 2 choices: tell us where it's at, draw us a map, tell us where it's at, or bring us or give us the treasure, and we will meet you at the. And he negotiates some old ruin along the river, southwest. that everybody knows of. It's an old empty ruin, and that we'll meet you there in 3 days with your wife, and we'll make an exchange. And they leave, taking the injured Zargard. Says, don't go yet. And he walks over and he grabs this guy up, and he throws him in their direction. He says, take your lackey with you. And so they take this. So they leave. They come as 6. They leave as 7. 4 digits shy of a hand. Okay, and they off. Harkis says, I want to follow them as far as I can. And I'm like, wow, dude, you've got... and he's healed up. By the way, you heal up defense, your defense score every day of 6 hours of uninterrupted rest. And he's 3 days, so he's got 18 plus the first day, 24. He's up to 25, I think, of his 30 points. So he's still not fully recovered, right? They've used no magic. They've used no extra rolls. It's just he's healed up. He follows them through the woods, and he'd already made a thievery check. I'm not going to give him double jeopardy, triple jeopardy. He follows them, and I say, you follow him about 5 miles in the woods headed north. And you notice as they head north, they leave the camp. They come in from the south. They come in from the north. They leave from the north, right, into the woods. But at some point, they purposely jockey to the right, and then they jockey back to the left, and they jockey back, and they end up heading southwest and crossing the Marne River. And you follow them 5 miles to that point, and you follow them across the river, right? And this was an old bridge that crosses the river, just an old dinky bridge. Well, he sees them cross, he crosses, and they set up camp. And he's traveled now 5 miles, but they did it the long way, right? They didn't want people to know they were headed southwest. They went northeast, but they backtracked southwest. So he now knows this. He then runs all the way back. And I say, you got to make an endurance check. And so he makes the endurance check. He runs the whole way back. Because he's been wounded, he's tired, etc. He stumbles into camp. He's made his endurance check. And he tells Zargard that he's followed him 5 miles. They did a roundabout way southwest across the old bridge. And they're only a day or so from those old ruins. They're not 4 days from the old ruins, but they're only a day or so from those old ruins. And Zargard and he armor up, and they grab all their belongings. The elder gives them food and water skins, and says, bring her back. And Zargard and he agree. They're gonna go follow him as far as they can, and they're going to try to bring Jasmine back. And so they set out. And so they set out in the night, traveling at night across the bridge, and they set camp not far from their camp. And the next morning they follow him. And they have to make a thievery survival check versus their perception survival check. So I had 2 checks. One, survival, if they can keep up with them, and then thievery to not be seen. Okay, and the highest guy makes those rolls. These are group checks, right? Not individual checks. So the highest thievery, Harkis, rolls to keep them hidden. The highest survival, Zargard, rolls to keep them from losing them and not getting confused or lost themselves. And they managed fine. They're not hard rolls. They were 12s. Needed a 12. I don't know if that's tough or whatever. 2 days, they follow him. And so now he's fully healed, right? Because they're not having any interruptions. They're able to rest. Zargard camps, and 6 hours is all you need to heal up. Okay, and they follow him to this very well hidden in the brush, in the trees, an underground kind of cave. Instead of going up into a mountain, it's like this hole that clearly leads down into a cavern. Out front, when they get there, they spy it for a day or so. They watch it, and 2 goblin guards at night, at sunset, come out and set up guard out front. They're goblins, and this sets them aback. Goblins, and the humans. The goblins are not garbed in black hoods and things, right? They look, truthfully, like they're paid mercenaries, right? But they don't know enough. They don't know why are goblins here, right? But they're not garbed in the dark, touched night hand stuff, right? They decide they're guarding that open hole. If they try to talk to him or assault him, they could trigger an alarm. They got to lure him away. So Harkis decides he's going to run right past them at front, and then stop dead and say, shelter, I need shelter, will you give me shelter? And so that's his goal. Meanwhile, he does this, and he slides to a stop. These goblins jump up off their barrels, and what do you want, And he says, I need shelter. I'm running from somebody. I need shelter. And lures him, and he says, I'll pay. And he pulls out his bag of, I think he had like 39 shards left in it or whatever. He pulls out his bag, says, I'll pay you. I just need shelter in that cave. Trust me, we need to hide. And so as they come toward him, Zargard comes in behind him. He makes a thievery check versus their perception. They're enamored with this guy standing there, this orc with a bag of shards. And he makes his warfare attack roll. He has surprise, and I'll tell you how surprise works. He has plenty of attack points to attack them both. He cuts them both down. Surprise gives him a +2 to his damage check, not to his to hit. Remember, attack allows you to attack anybody you have enough points to attack. He has plenty of points to attack them both. He cuts them both down with his longsword. Bang, bang. They're done. They don't make a sound. They never spot him. Surprise gives him almost a guaranteed damage check, and they're just minions. They're down. They go through their bodies. They find they have about 3 shards each. They take these shards. They put them in his bag. And then they go over to the hole, and they look and listen. And they realize, okay, these guys are obviously the night shift. And they're goblins, which means they have night sight like us. We can't sneak into this hole and anticipate that they will not see us. Harkus, being the thrill seeker he is, yells down the hole. So this was amazing. So they're having this argument. Let's go in. Let's not go in. Let's go in. Let's lure them out. Let's not go in. And they agreed they're going to flip a coin. All right? So they literally, Brian and Josh flip a coin, and he calls tails. Brian gets tails, and he wins, and he says, we're waiting for the next shift. Josh ignores him and says, Harkus goes, Pah! And he yells down the, come and get it. We're here for you. And so Brian's like, God, dude, we just argued about this. We flipped a coin. But I give him a battle scar. Bam, dude, that's a battle scar. He's a thrill seeker, right? And he's crazy. He's already been cut down once, and he's still crazy. Okay. They can hear into the cave echoing and barking of these goblins in their speak, right? And they come rushing out, and they come into the cave shoulder to shoulder. So there's no way for these goblins to surround them, and no way for these goblins to get by them. And they waylay through 6 of these minions in 3 turns, all 6 of them. And meanwhile, they can hear echoing throughout the cave, deeper into the caverns. They can hear somebody yelling, deeper, more baritone, barking and yelling. And they actually at one point start hearing the cries, the screams of a woman. And they go there, oh my God, are they killing her? What are they doing? And they start moving down. They come to the first left cavern. And they listen at that break, and they realize that the yelling and screaming is not coming from there. They go further down. Again, I drew, as they proceeded, I drew on the map. I didn't draw it all out. I drew it as they proceeded. So they come into the cave here. They fight the goblins in this narrow passage. They pass this alcove. They pass this. They pass the left passage, and they head on into these caverns, this maze-like cavern. Well, in the maze-like cavern, they come to a thug into the darkness. Again, it's an orc, and they have night sight. Boom. So they come to a thug orc. Zargard takes him out very quickly, while Harkus goes around the other way, right? And they don't know how this is. I'm drawing it as they go. Meanwhile, Harkus comes around. He fails a perception check. He is surprised. Galak steps out of the shadows behind one of those rock stalagmites and hits him with his sword. And this was sweet. So he's surprised. That's a +2 to the damage check, right, etc. Steps out of the darkness. He's surprised. He swings and takes a shot in the chest. And this is where, and I'm not certain I did this right. This is one of those things I'll have to ask Robert about. Brian says, I'm going to turn the blow. And he does. I mean, because when this attack happened, I said, you're surprised. You can't go. You're going to be surprised, but roll your attack points. What do you want to do? And of course, he's rolling warfare. So we did that. We did initiative, although I described how he's surprised. And he says, I want to turn the blow. And turn the blow is, this was like, oh, this is sweet. So he literally gets hit in the chest with this axe. I think it was an axe. And he would have taken, I think, minus 14, 15, minus 2, 13 points of damage out of his 30 in one shot. But he says, no, I'm gonna spin the point, and I'm gonna turn the blow. And he does just that. His defense score comes off of him. And so he turns the blow on Galak. And this is Galak. This was the guy who led this little group to go steal the girl. He's like a minor. He's like a He's not a lieutenant, he is a thug, but he's like the leader of this group that was sent by the ranger to do this part of the deal, right? Steal the girl, negotiate for the treasure. Okay, so he's like a lieutenant in command, but he's not a lieutenant in his he's not a lieutenant in the NPC grading. He's a thug, but he's a lieutenant in the command of these little pockets of bad guys, right? Okay, so they weren't up against a lieutenant, is my point. Okay. He ends up turning the blow, and they end up, of course, in a combat. And Galak's pretty good, right? I mean, but he's a thug, so he's beatable. Meanwhile, there's one thug left. There were two thugs, and Galak was in the chamber. When the fight started with the goblins, he came out that left passage and went running toward Jasmine. He hid in the dark, and bam, waylaid Harkis. Well, there were two other thugs that are in that cavern on patrol. Those two thugs come out of the left corridor and smack dab into Zargard. Zargard is in combat with these two thugs, while Harkis is in combat with Galak. Harkis chooses to use influence on his second round. He's turned the blow. He's avoided damage. He's turned the blow on Harkis. So it's like this surprise attack, and he's fast on his reflexes, and he basically with his scimitar turns the blow and drives his sword into his ribs. I think this is why they love it. This is why I love it, because mechanics support these very cool things that can occur like this. It was amazing. Now again, I'm not certain I did it right. Maybe surprise should have trumped all chance at it, but I'll talk to Robert about that. Okay, but it's hard when it's hard to say to somebody, dude, no, that's not what turn the blows for. No, it was like his reflexes were just fast enough. It was so cool. Okay, and he says to Galak, give up. We're here. You cannot win. You have no choice. And of course, meanwhile, they can hear Zargard fighting the other two, literally on the other side of this large block stone. I mean, it's like they're separated by a 10-block stone, fighting on either side of it. Galak steps back in a defensive posture and parleys with him, and tells him, "I'm going to kill the girl now. How dare you do this? I will kill the girl, and we will go get Willem, and we will torture Willem until he tells us where that treasure's at." And Harkis tells him, as we're making influence rolls, right? And I'm spinning battle scars to keep his influence up. Well, Harkis is not very talented, so he's trying to befriend him or frighten him into leaving, or basically. And Galak, I'm spinning battle scars to ignore any stuff he tries to do. Meanwhile, he's telling him that we have another path to get that treasure, and Harkis is telling him there is no treasure. Don't you understand? You're wasting your time. You're going to murder this girl. So he's trying desperately to communicate with Galak, who again is kind of a lieutenant in the field. Meanwhile, Zargard, in 3 turns, takes out these two thugs, comes around the backside, and Galak's been backpedaling toward the cage the whole time. So I can't explain it, but like there's this block, and they're fighting on this side, and they're communicating on this side while Galak's backing up. So when he kills the thugs, he comes around the stone, and he's got them both now in his vision. It's like they come around the stone and walk toward him while he's backpedaling, and they're communicating with him. Now Zargard adds influence to this, and I believe Harkis or Zargard blows up. Their fate die blows up, and at this point, he realizes he's alone. The girl's screaming in the cage behind him, and he realizes he's utterly alone. It's echoing through the caverns. And I quit spinning the battle scars at this point, and I allow them to lower his composure enough that he agrees to run, and he does. He evacuates and runs out of the whole cavern, and they let him go. And they go over to the girl, and they sit down, because Harkis, I think Harkis or Zargard, one of them had taken a couple of shots against the thugs, and he had already killed multiple minions, and they had had a couple of fights with thugs, and then these two thugs, and I think he was down to about 35 hit points, was Zargis. And he pulls out his healing flask, because he doesn't know what else is coming. And he offers it to Harkis, and Harkis says, no, save it. And he thinks about it for a second, and so he saves it, he puts it away and saves it. Goes over to the girl, and the girl's screaming and crying, and she's terrified. They go, no, don't you remember we came into the camp to help you? And she recognizes them, and then she falls on her knees, crying, sobbing, and they say, we're here to bring you back, but first, and this was amazing, clever. Brian says, but first, the treasure, is it true? And I allow him to make, the roll. Again, she's not a lieutenant. She's just his wife, kind of not even a chieftess or anything. And Harkis steps up and says the same. Yes, we must know. Is this true? And so they boom, they beat her down in a couple of rounds of her influence until she befriends them basically, and she says, yes, my husband lies. He's known with this treasure. It's not a Cord's hoard that is the myth, but there is a treasure that he is aware of, and he hides. And so now I have this information. And she said, now please take me out of here, and don't harm my husband. He's protecting the village legacy, right? Makes sense. So he goes over to the crank, and it's locked. And she says, oh, he carries the key. The man you let run carries the key. And so he picks up a rock, and he bashes the lock off the crank. And the crank's what lifts the portcullis gates to get them out, to get her out. Well, they don't check for traps, nothing. He pulls that gate. I say, make an opposed check of your athletics against this arrows that launch out of the actual gear itself. It's like as he pulls it down, they launch out into his face. And he fails that roll and takes 15 points of damage. So now he's down, I think -4 for his arm. He's down like 26 or something HP. And he stumbles back with these little arrows in his face, and he's gasping, and he stumbles over and he looks at Harkis and he starts pulling him out of his face. Brian says, I'm pulling him out of my face. And he's smelling them. Are they poisoned? Are they poisoned? And I said, well, you can't tell, but you don't feel any other effects other than the fact that it hurts and you're bleeding profusely and your face is pot-marked with all these arrow holes. So he says, I want to drink my potion. So he drinks his healing potion. They get the girl out and they take her back. And it's a 2-day march back, almost 3 days. And they march through the night, the first night. They want to get as far away from Galak where Galak was. But before that, they investigate the chamber, and they find the 80 shard box full of 80 shards, a little treasure, and they find a ring. They don't know what it is, but they find a ring, and they find his orders from Kalok the Ranger in Cyril, and it's the order saying kidnap Willem's wife and get from him the information we want or the treasure, and then feel free to do with her and him what you will once you get it. So they have now this note, these orders that were given to Galak. So they have a treasure, they have a ring, and they have the note. So they know now who this guy, they know that somebody gave him these orders. They go back to the village. Great celebration. And they come into town, and Zagard and Harkis heal. They sleep. They actually leave him alone to embrace. And they go into a tent or a campsite. They don't have a tent. They go and set up a little camp in the village, and they rest and heal up for a day. And the next day, they decide, now that they're feeling better and they look better, they go to him and they say, listen, Willem, we know there's a treasure. You have 2 choices. You can, Zargard, you can give us the location of that treasure, or you can tell us why you would have jeopardized your wife for this, etc., etc. Willem agrees. If you help us defend, and you help us survive their next attack, they will come back now, for sure. I will share that information with you. So they decide, Harkis says, I will help train the young men how to fight and how to defend. Zogard, let's teach them how to build defenses. And Zargard stops him and says, no, we must first move the camp. We got to pack everything up and move. The first rule of defense, says Brian, the first rule of defense is you can't find us. That's the best defense. Then there's a legitimate defense. And it's like, it's brilliant. So Willem says, yes, you're right, we must move the camp. So they spend like a day tearing down all the tents, packing everything up, and they march. And the goal is, Zargis says, I'm going to use my survival to do a similar tactic. I'm going to go a roundabout way where it's harder for them to follow. And Harkis says, yes, we should lead them across the river, and then back across the river, and then back across the river, and back across the river, because it's going to be hard to find our trail if we keep crossing the river. So they cross the river 3 times, and then they go east into the endless plains. And they think now they're pretty safe. They think that they're going to make it difficult for them to find him. They'll find him eventually, but they think it's going to buy them time. And this takes like a week, right, of travel. And they set up. And then they spend another week setting up the tents and building defenses. Zargis is making rolls to build defenses, and Harkis is making rolls to train these young men and women how to defend themselves with whatever weapons they have available. And this goes on. It's just like 2 weeks. 2 weeks of time, right? And they made I think 4 rolls. I think I asked them to make like 4 rolls when they would change. When Zargis would say, now I'm going to show them how to do this thing. And I said, we have to roll that, right? Okay. And they didn't spill any battle scars on this. And then I said, okay, it's time to look at our prophecy meter. You guys have saved an entire town. That's 4 points. You guys have, in an act of kindness, you went and saved Jasmine. That's a point. The act of kindness to heal the girl who was badly wounded, and Harkis helping to erect new shelters. Those are ones. Those are acts of kindness. 1, 2, 3. Anyway, I tallied it all up, and then I took away the digits. I said, and then you cut 4 of his digits off, and I took away points for that. And he's like, oh, okay, I get it. Anyway, they had something like +7. Because saving a village is like 4. The acts of kindness are 1. The acts of evil are like -1, -2. But it's flexible. Anyway, they end up with like a +6 overall, +7 I think overall. And I roll the new, and then you roll 3d6 and you add that plus to it. And the higher that number is, the more points come off the prophecy meter. And they started, remember, the game at a prophecy meter of 9, which gave me 9 battle scars to use against them in every scene. They reduced it to 7. It dropped it -2. So now it's still tense. But they went from a 9 prophecy when the game started to 7 prophecy meter. Okay, so they've trained everybody how to defend themselves. They've built defenses around the camp. They've moved the camp, and they zigzagged across the river, making it difficult to find a track. They go east out into the endless plains, and they build them a camp. And then they decide, they say, we're going to help them now for the next few days hunt and gather, and we're going to help them build a store of food, etc. And we're going to ultimately make this safe and as healthy as we can. And Zargard says, and I want to sit with Willem about my role now in the village. And so Brian, and I love Brian, gets this deep voice like a big orc, the 6'3" orc, gets this deep voice. I want to talk to Willem about, it's so cool. So Brian sits with Willem and the woman Jasmine, and he says, we now know of the treasure she has told us. Do not blame her. We understand it is important. We understand it's the legacy, but understand, as long as people know of this treasure, you will always be a potential target. With that said, I think I should be your war chief, your man-at-arms, and no rolls. I give him a battle scar immediately for pursuing his drive of gain power. And bam, they agree. And they do a blood oath on it. We have this little blood oath ritual, right? And they have a feast to celebrate all of this. So now Zargard has become the war chief of this little camp, this little village. It has no name, right? And Willem's the chief, and he's kind of their war chief, their commander, their, what do you call it? Not man-at-arms, but, the leader of their army, their war chief, I guess would be the best way to put it. That was the term Brian used, war chief, so he's the war chief. And, of course, Harkis is betting widows. And there's a lot more widows because many died in the initial in media res start. And they earned total of... they divided up, and they didn't get equal XP because Harkis had a couple of extra XP. Let me see if I wrote it. I think I wrote it down. It was an amazing game. Plus treasure. Prophecy meter dropped to 7. Here we go. Harkis got 105. He got an extra 25 for the thrill seeking, a use of his thrill seeker twice. So he got 50 extra P, and of course Zargard for pursuing power by telling Wilhelm, you need a war chief, and we need to make sure this village survives and that money and that legacy survive. I want to be so I gave him 25 for using his drive there. Because it forced him literally into a conversation in a way of getting this role, this power. Okay, so he got an extra. So they both ended up with 155 and 105. Zargard got 105 and 155 for Harkis in XP. And then we fade to black, and we started to fade up on Act 3. And I say 1 week later, and we talked a little bit, and we decided it would be best to start. That was the best place to stop, and why don't we just stop the session there, because it was really kind of a normal ending. We checked the prophecy meter. They were awarded XP. They were fully rested. They had developed a new relationship with the village. Harkis was seeking thrills of the flesh, right? Thrills of the flesh. And I thought, you know what? you're right. You guys have done all of this, and it was just Act Two, building, moving them, and defending them, and building the stuff, and we're done, right? So we stopped there, and we talked a little bit about the system. We talked a little bit about the quite a few notes here. Talked about the game system. Talked about the value of the mechanics and how they support every possible thing you need to do. Those things all fall under a conflict, whether it's physical, emotional, or power. We talked about the battle scars being an important element to giving heroes these abilities to step outside. They didn't use a lot of them. And I shared, of course, the battle scars made me totally free to enjoy, in a way, being an adversary of theirs without GM fiat, without cheating them, without railroading them, and it was unbelievable. It was the part of the game I didn't expect. I've been a player in it. I've read the rules. I've read the rules again. I've read the rules again while preparing all week for this. I did prepare this as an adventure night, a 5-act adventure night. This was not a sandbox. This was not a railroad, but it was not a sandbox. But I didn't anticipate how the battle scars were going to be such a rewarding piece for me. And that is one of the things we talked about, how rewarding the game is, because everything's supported by the mechanics. And how rewarding it is in combat to have to think about, do I attack 2? Do I attack 1 and save some? And Harkus found out he was literally dying in the first fight. And if he had had more points, he could have done Turn the Blow. Or he could have done Phantom Move, right? He could have shifted himself and made him re-roll, but he had no points to spend. So what I love about Peace versus 5th edition's feats and talents is you have to have the points to utilize them. And some can only be utilized once in a round or once in a turn or whatever, right? Battle stars can be spent almost endlessly until you're out of them. Anyway, it was as good as I would have imagined reading it and as a player. And I would argue, I think the best alternative to the D20 stuff that's going on out there. I love Phage, Fantasy Age. I loved Dragon Age and Modern Age. Those are 3-die-6 games with stunt charts, but it is basically a die 20 type game. There's this character achievement and character bloat and math bloat, and those games feel very much like modern D20. It's just it's a 3-die-6 curve and it uses stunt charts, but for the most part, it's a similar process of bloat growth, and your players technically are passive. And one of the arguments that the stunt chart is fun and they get to spend points, but it only occurs on a special roll, right? And so you don't really feel like you're in control of that until you've made the special roll. Then you can spend some points to do something badass, but you got to spend it. In Peace, you have to roll to see how many AP you get, but you can formulate how you want to use those AP before, you can either attack 3 times or attack 3 different foes, or you can prepare to do Phantom Move, and so it's got this simple tactical strategy based on a variable dice before the fight, before the round. Then they're in total control of how they want to engage in the combat and what people they want to engage in. And oh, by the way, the moving around the board, the maps, I literally would draw it out with the pens, and I would draw the block in, and we'd put a token where Galak was at, and they'd put their tokens were moving down the thing. So simple. We never had any complicated combats in which I would have had to go to the book for some of these moves, right? It was very, very simple melee combat stuff. The one thing I do regret is we didn't have the 3 or 5 guys. I had anticipated 5 players, which would have been a lot for me. It's been a long time since I played a game this complicated with 5 players. 2 we knew may not show. We anticipated the 3rd for sure. He told us it for sure. He vanished. We never heard from him. He never even called us to tell us. He never texted. Brian couldn't get him when he tried to text him. He vanished. So Brian will have a chat with him. He's one of his buddies. So it was a great, great session. I got to tell you, Robert, this is brilliant, and I will play it again, and I will run it again, and I will run it again. I would argue right now, if I'm going to run a game that has a little more depth and a little more mechanics and a great world setting, I'm going to pick Peace, because the mechanics are that unique, and the mechanics are varied, which makes it fun for the players, and the players are in control, although they have a resource they have to manage. And so nothing is a given on any down, on any turn. So, I mean, think about D&D. I got a +5 in my attack bonus. It's always a +5 attack bonus. Always. I'm just rolling a d20, add 5, roll d20, add 5, roll d20, add 5. This is, you roll the dice, you go, dang, I got 4 points. Oh, shit. Okay, I'm going to put all my focus attack to try to wound this guy. Right? Or, oh man, I got 12. Okay, I'm going to attack this minion 3 times. I'm going to attack the thug twice and the minion once. And then he describes how he dives into the thug and then spins around with one final shot upon the minion as he's rolling damage checks, right? Brilliant. And maybe I'm spinning battle scars to go, I'm turning the blow, buddy, right? However, none of the NPCs had turned the blow for me yesterday. But that's the other thing. So I'll talk to Robert about this. Surprise, I had them go ahead and roll their intention, their initiative. Although surprise, they went initiative, he gets +2 to his damage check. I know that. But because we rolled to set our attack points, he then had the points to spend. And he said, no, I'm turning the blow. And I think I did it right, and I think the mechanic supported this. He is a hero, and it was badass. It's like out of the corner of his eye, just a flash, he sees this axe, and somehow he manages with the scimitar to bash it away and drive it. And they are heroes, and he did have the points, and I think I did it right. And because of that, it was one of the most amazing moments as he turns this guy steps out of the darkness with an axe to the chest, and he turns the blow, and it was like, this is why you choose these games, right? And it was all mechanically supported. So, peace, everybody out there. Have a wonderful weekend. Talk to you again. Bye-bye.